Welcome back to the panel discussion, Delivering on the Promise of the Cloud, sponsored by Leidos and Amazon Web Services on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. My guests today are Brett McMillan, Director, Federal Government Amazon Web Services, and Keith Johnson, Chief Technology Officer and Chief Engineer, Defense and Intelligence at Leidos. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy. I was at an event a couple weeks back. This is a great speaker. His name is William Avenina, and an FBI guy who's working at ODNI now. And he talked about, the FBI has estimated that in just 1 year, 2014, the losses from cybersecurity were $100 billion with a B. I mean, that's a whole lot of room to point fingers. Do you point fingers at the CISO? You point fingers at the CIO? Who do you point fingers at? Maybe, well, I don't know, Keith, should security be baked into the system? Or do you want to point fingers?
Well, absolutely. This security should be baked in. And at Leidos, that's our approach. Cybersecurity in particular is an evolving topic. You can't rest on your laurels thinking that your system is secure because you baked it in to begin with. You always have to continue to evolve. That's primarily because the diversity of the environment, the users, and the adversaries who may be trying to get in and take that $100 billion worth of data is very diverse, and therefore it requires taking a very methodological approach to baking security in, but not stopping there, continuing to look and evaluate and innovate on how we can do security better. And so it's more of a yes and kind of issue where you can't stop just because you think you've got it baked in. And so we're constantly evaluating the advanced persistent threat landscape, talking to our vendors, talking to our partners like Amazon, understanding what they're seeing in the market, what they're seeing in the threat landscape, and then integrating that in to deliver even more secure systems to our customers.
Well, but I would think that Amazon is so many different places, so much out there, you really understand the cybersecurity threat real well.
Yes, and so we spend a tremendous amount of time on security. But if you really get down to the basics of really good cybersecurity, it really starts with knowing what you have and being able to respond to those threats that are out there. And one of the things that we found with so many of our customers is that in the old model, in a data center model, to ask a simple question like, do I have an operating system anywhere in my network that has a known vulnerability or a new vulnerability we just found out about? And in so many enterprises, that question is a hard question to ask. You're going to probably have to ask that question of multiple different program areas, multiple different data centers, and being able to quickly know what you have in an old model is sometimes really hard to do. What we found is when these agencies move to the cloud, those questions you can answer with a single API call, a single query, and you can say, do I have that? And then the next part of it is how do I respond to that? And so AWS provides multiple tools and services to not only monitor these things and see if your systems have drifted out of compliance, but also give companies like Leidos, who's working with the federal government, the tools to quickly respond to these things in ways that it was really hard to do in the past. So for example, in a typical environment, if you wanted to just quickly rebuild your entire environment, that's kind of hard to do when you're constrained by only what you have in the data center. In the cloud, you can just spin up an entire separate separate system and then bring down the old system. So those are some of the really basic things that when we're helping out Leidos and the federal government on, now they can take that and build on top of it to do some really neat advanced cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm. So Keith, they don't have to spend 16 hours a day worrying about security. They can spend 16 hours a day helping the federal agencies achieve their goals.
Right. And also, just like we were talking about in the previous segment, it's all about how do I apply analytics and leveraging cloud scale capabilities and API calls in order to surface to the humans, the analysts, the right kinds of information so that they're not digging through all the details. And that also allows fewer people to worry about, as you mentioned, John, security, and then others can focus on mission. Although I would say security is part of mission, and so we never want to relegate cybersecurity as a secondary activity. It's all part of mission.
You know, Brett, I was listening to a productivity expert on a podcast yesterday, and he said two things you got to start off with. First of all, eliminate activities and then automate activities, and then you can take and focus on the real problem at hand. And I'm taking notes. I'm saying, well, it's almost like the conversation we're having here. It's eliminate certain activities that you could be better spent doing other things, and then automate. So eliminate and automate, they work hand in hand.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And so, and so we're seeing that throughout. And whether or not we're using things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to automate things, or if we're using more mundane or basic level type things, we're seeing huge returns that are happening throughout the federal government. The other thing that we're finding is when you go into a different way of operating, we're seeing surprises. And so, for example, one of the surprises that we're seeing, a very large agency I was working with, they moved everything into the cloud. And in the old operational model, what they had was that all of their best servers, all of their best storage, all of their best equipment went to production. Next on the pecking order was testing, because for cybersecurity, you have to test that really well. And last in order was development. And when they moved to the cloud, they realized they could pay for about 3 times the number of resources that they could previously. So they went to all the developers and say, hey, if you come up with an idea, try it out. Here's your account, try it out. They had no idea how much they were starving those developers for resources, because what was happening was developers would come up with an idea and it would take them 3 months to get the resources. They gave up before they even tried it. Wow. Now people are trying things in the same day, and they're trying it with near instant access to best-in-class tools, best-in-class solutions. And what these agencies are finding when they give their developers the ability to do that, not only do they increase their cyber threat because they're able to do more on security, but the speed at which they're iterating all the systems has just dramatically increased.
It goes back to the poverty versus wealth mindset that we were talking about earlier. Whereas if your smart, innovative people aren't able to really try out their ideas because they have to go through too many processes, or they get the leftovers from production, you're really not innovating and keeping really abreast and a pace of what's happening externally. But when you give them access to the best on a rental basis, not an ownership basis, that allows our most innovative individuals to really flourish, and then to come up with ideas that we would have never thought of otherwise.
So I bet you should take your business card, get a red pen and scratch it out and put down productivity specialist.
I like that.
That's really what it is. I mean, it's taking these basic, simple human concepts of being more productive and then putting them in a more sophisticated environment that can generate results, just like you talked about.
Going back just on automation, one area, cybersecurity obviously is everybody's asking how can we automate cybersecurity tasks, and that's one thing that we're working on hard. I will say just as a commentary, cybersecurity is a very difficult. We don't want to underestimate the difficulties in the cyber landscape and the threat landscape that we deal with currently. It requires lots of energy, lots of expense in order to just make sure that we're secure, because it is a battle that we're under right now. And so while we want to automate, and we should automate the tasks, we can't rush too fast to automate because of the nuances involved. We have to make sure that we are secure, and that does require people right now. It requires a lot of people. Over time, though, it's going to be a big effort from us. I know it is with Amazon as well as the commercial world, to understand how we can really automate in a way that keeps us safe, but takes away some of the burdens that the humans are undertaking right now.
Brett talked about this idea of workloads. So my question to you is what does it take to realize the value of combining workloads, rethinking workloads, and then leveraging analytics? I mean, this is exactly what he talked about in his productivity.
Right. So it goes back to treating data as your first-class citizen. Data is the most important commodity that we mentioned in the first segment. The fact is that right now we kind of think of it from an architectural standpoint as you have your application, you have your business logic, you have your database, and you think about in that context, the actual data is like is secondary to those kind of topics. But when we're wanting to leverage analytics, we want to leverage the cloud, you need to start with data and figure out your data architecture, and data engineering is the key to that. Then you can apply analytics and then allow that data, whether it's a data lake you want to call it, or a data hub, or just smart storage, ultimately. You're able then to provide access and insights across many customer segments.
Last week I was talking to a big smart guy from NIST. They're all smart up there. His name is Michael Garris. And he's talking about artificial intelligence. He said, now it's a national priority, to use artificial intelligence in some way. And I think for someone like you, artificial intelligence is just a little tool in the toolbox in order to increase productivity. So if it increases productivity, let's use AI. If not, we're not going to use AI at all. I think that's what it boils down to, doesn't it?
Yes, and so when we look at how you use machine learning, artificial intelligence, what's happening to so many of the federal workers is, we talked about this earlier, data sets are getting so large that individuals aren't able to digest that information and do things that we asked them to in the past. So when we automate, when we bring in machine learning and artificial intelligence, we free up these federal workers to do these jobs we're really paying them to do, make judgment calls, be creative, come up with better solutions for the citizens. And we're seeing this throughout the federal agencies, anywhere from, in the science field. So, for example, NASA, we've been working with them. We've been taking pictures of the sun and studying sunspots and solar flares, which have a dramatic impact on the weather here in the United States or in the world. And the problem is we've got 40 plus years of pictures out there. And how do you analyze that? It can take humans years and years and throwing lots of people at that. Or we can train some machine learning models to go at that and take a look at that. And we think we're going to get to the point where now we can start predicting these solar flares. We're seeing that there. We're seeing it in other areas. So, for example, how we give out money to states under grants management. A lot of that task is repetitive. And take the repetitive task and apply automation to it. And now you can have the people working in this grant management office actually doing the things that we expect them to do. So I look at this as we're helping the federal worker be more productive.
Dr. Ian Buck said that the typical radiologist has 6,000 images to look at a day. Well, your eye's going to get blurry by about 2 o'clock. And so you have to take the tools that Brett was talking about, applied AI to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. And so AI, I agree, is a national imperative that we need to continue to invest in science and technology in our starting at really elementary school and moving through post-grad in order to ensure that we are training our next generation in order to advance this national priority, because our competitors in the world market, maybe adversaries as well, are not standing still, and they are also investing a lot. When it comes to things like imagery or MRI, just one example of that is the ability to reduce the cognitive burden on humans, so they're not making errors, and then also to identify new things, like cancer, identifying cancer at a much earlier stage, which then opens up multiple new treatment options that aren't available if you catch it later. It's just one great example. But I would be remiss if I didn't emphasize that there is a mantra. We'll just apply AI. We'll just apply AI, and everything will be solved.
Give me some AI and slap it in there.
You can't apply AI unless you have data, and data has to be unlocked. And unfortunately, right now, just because of the way legacy architectures have evolved, data right now is not in a good place to have AI applied to it.
It's a landlocked lake.
It's a land. We have landlocked data, and so we need to open that up and re-architect it and expose the data, and then to expose data that's labeled, because that is when you can really apply AI. AI did not this third wave of AI. If you kind of go back to the 40s. Did not occur without the breadth of labeled data that we now have available to us.
So let me just follow up on that. That's you mentioned cancers and the medical side. A real world example of how AI is being used well is there's a company out there that has developed a smartphone app. And so we know for detecting skin cancers, the key is early detection. Mm-hmm. And yet most of us aren't dermatologists. And we don't really know if that lesion is a suspicious tumor or whether or not it's a freckle I've never noticed. And how do we get these people to go see their dermatologists at the right time without flooding them with people that just discovered a new freckle? Mm-hmm. And so this company has used Amazon Recognition, machine learning, and our serverless computing called Lambda, where you can, in the privacy of your own home, take a picture, and it will just come back and say, this probably is nothing, and wait for your next routine appointment to go see your doctor.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Or This is probably suspicious. Go schedule an appointment with your dermatologist right away. And we're seeing amazing outcomes come from that type of technologies. So apply this to the federal government. These are problems that could not have been easily solved not too long ago. That technology really didn't exist a decade or two ago, and certainly didn't exist in the palm of your hand with a smartphone. Start applying those to all the problems that are happening within the federal government. So I like to think of machine learning and artificial intelligence as it's giving agencies the ability to solve problems that they never could solve before.
Keith, my daughter will say the national parks are an important national asset. They are. Some people in this town will say, federal data sets are a very important national asset as well. And so I'm thinking about images and data sets, and can AI be used to protect these assets, these data sets, and leverage them and get information from them? I imagine it can.
It certainly can. It can in multiple ways. Obviously, to AI applied to cyber, making sure that they're safe, but also applied to who is looking at these data sets. Perhaps you could identify patterns of usage that would recommend that this data be used by others because it's a similar usage pattern or use case. And then what we are doing at Leidos is taking some of the great artificial intelligence models that have been trained on lots of commercial data, and then trying to figure out how do I take those great models and apply something we call transfer learning to a smaller data set, so that the national assets that our federal customers have can really benefit from AI, the AI revolution, like from object detection to natural language processing to speech recognition, and
satellite
things like that.
imagery, health information.
Right.
It crosses all fields, doesn't
Exactly.
it? Great. I'm your moderator, John Gilroy, on the panel discussion, Delivering on the Promise of the Cloud, sponsored by Leidos and Amazon Web Services on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.